So, good afternoon, everyone, and an extremely warm welcome to the Royal Society of Edinburgh's contested Rural Environment series. There's almost 200 of you online, so this promises a very lively debate. My name is Professor Sarah Skerratt, and I'm Chief Executive of the Royal Society of Edinburgh, and I'm very excited to be chairing the session today, particularly given the calibre of the speakers and the audience, and also because I have a research background in rural issues, so I'm personally very interested in what we're debating today. As Scotland's National Academy, the RSE's mission is to make knowledge useful. And this series, running over 5 weeks, will be addressing 5 key issues that impact rural communities and environments in Scotland. Each week, we will be speaking to 2 experts who will be discussing the issues and potential solutions around land use change and restoring nature, energy futures, tourism, housing and population retention, health and social care, heritage and regional identity. This series builds on the recent Islands Past, Present and Future events, which highlighted some of the themes we're taking forward through our discussions. The events will all be available to watch live on the RSE's YouTube channel every Thursday from 12 till 1 until the 3rd of April, with the recordings available to watch after each event. I'm now going to introduce you via their brief CVs to our fantastic speakers and summariser that we have online today. So firstly, Professor Raffaella Ocone, a Fellow of the RSE, and the theme lead for hydrogen within the iNet-Z Plus Global Research Institute at Heriot-Watt University. Raffaella is an engineer who works in academia. She was the first woman to be Professor of Chemical Engineering in Scotland and the second in the UK. Her research deals with the design and operation of industrial processes such as oil refining. As the world population continues to increase, so the energy demand is predicted to increase. Raffaella's work is aimed at the development of technologies for sustainable and clean energy generation at a large scale that will be able to meet the energy demands whilst reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Those technologies include biomass pyrolysis and chemical looping for hydrogen production. Raffaella studies the technical challenges that might hinder large-scale, economically viable conversion processes and pyroclastic flow and lahars to gain information into the management of people safety and environmental protection following a volcano eruption and flooding. Her research includes scientific and economic analysis, as well as social responsibility and ethics, with her latest moves having been to use artificial intelligence to tackle the floods of data available in the chemical and process industries where her work is applied. Dr. Becky Ford is a relief lecturer in the Institute for Northern Studies at the University of Highlands and Islands, or UHI, and a development officer for Community Energy Scotland. Becky was born in Orkney and is, as I've said, a development officer for Community Energy Scotland, working on the Island Centre for Net Zero project and at the Institute for Northern Studies at UHI, where she completed her interdisciplinary PhD, Words and Waves, Ecological Dialogism as an Approach to Discourse, Community and Marine Renewable Energy in Orkney. Becky is passionate about community as the process which shapes relationships between people and place, and her research explores the complex entanglement of these relationships as well as their importance. Her role in a funded research project called Islands Futures, co-producing an island research agenda for sustainable communities, brings together her community development work, her research interests and lived experience, reflecting her belief that research should be shaped by and bring genuine benefits to communities. And thirdly, I would like to introduce our summariser, who will give us his thoughts at the end of today's session. Professor Des Thompson, a Fellow of the RSE, and Leverhulme Emeritus Fellow at the University of the Highlands and Islands, or UHI. With more than 30 years' experience working in government agencies, Des was the principal advisor on biodiversity and science with Nature Scotland's nature agency. He worked closely with the Scottish Government, devising the Scottish Biodiversity Strategy 2022 to 45 and its delivery plan. Now a Leverhulme Emeritus Fellow with the UHI Northwest and Hebrides, his interests include the conservation ecology of North European shorebirds, upland ecosystems, and science policy by biodiversity decision making. Des advises the UN on climate and biodiversity issues in his role as Convention on the Conservation of Migratory Species of Wild Animals, COP-appointed Scientific Counselor for Climate Change. I think that's the best job title I've heard in a while. And a member of the technical advisory group supporting the conservation of migratory birds of prey in Africa and Eurasia. Des is also a member of the Scottish Government's Biodiversity Programme Advisory Group and Vice President of the Field Studies Council. He's published very widely, took his PhD and DSc from the University of Nottingham, and hails from the small village of Coleraine in Sutherland. I feel like I'm doing introductions on University Challenge, actually. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over firstly to Raffaella and then to Becky to have 5 minutes each to set out their stall, and I'll be keeping a close eye on the clock. So firstly, Raffaella, a warm welcome to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you to everyone who is online today listening to us. I'll try to be brief, and I'll try to set a little bit the scene for what really I hope we are going to discuss, and we can have a rich discussion, I hope, about these issues here. Now, the first thing that I would like to say is that the energy landscape today, and it's not just in Scotland, is very complex. And unfortunately, and you will understand why I say unfortunately, it's not a technical problem only. There are socioeconomic, logistic, policy-related issues, historical issues that contribute to this very complex landscape. However, as an engineer, I think that we are very much used to work with complex systems. And the first thing that I'm going to advocate that this requires very much a system approach. So hence, we really need to look at all this together like a system approach, like engineers are very much used to do. The other thing which I would like to do is just to keep our attention on some of the issues that have been discussed and published in the Just Transition Plan and the strategy that the Scottish energy strategy that the Scottish government has published. I think that there is an ambition for sure that we do engage with local community, that we empower local community to produce their own energy, to be self-sufficient, but also I think we have to look about storage, which is a point which I would like to discuss. It's not just producing, but also store the energy. And I think that what we really need to look carefully is about it's the mechanisms which are not there yet, I suppose, in full to realize these ambitions. And these are a combination of upgrading infrastructures, fostering new projects, promoting energy efficient, and make people aware that we have to save energy, because it's not just about producing and storing it, it's also be more aware of saving energy. So I think that we have to look for a combination of strategic investment, but also collaboration and innovation. So the points that I would like us to concentrate, and I hope we can discuss, is about what we think and what we can do about community-owned renewable energy projects, public transportation for the rural areas, and last but not least, hydrogen. And although these are issues that might look not very much linked, I think that they are very much linked, because we are reading things in the news, we have been said things, and not always actually this can be achievable, at least in the very near future. And on top of all this, the other 2 points that I would like really to consider for us is the just transition. It's very clear in the document that we have to look at the just transition. And also, like technicians, like engineers, we need to look at the just transition. And I want to explore really with the audience what it does mean in practice. What is a just transition for us in this context of rural Scotland? Also, energy poverty, that unfortunately is something that remains still significant in some of the rural areas and involves, of course, upgrading infrastructures that probably is not something that we can do immediately. So these are mainly the points that I would like explore during our discussion today. And also finally to say that, there is a regulatory framework. We know that there are policies out there, but how easy for rural Scotland is to navigate all the difficult regulation, the difficult to read and implement regulation, permits, and land use, environmental impact that are out there. So I will stop here. I hope I'm being within my 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Raffaella. You have indeed kept precisely within your allocated time, and we all appreciate that, as it gives the audience more time to ask questions. So I extend an extremely warm welcome as well to Becky. Over to you for your 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks to everybody for joining us this morning, and to Raffaella for making such wonderful points to start with, because it's made what I want to say easy. I want to start by problematizing the use of the word community. It's used all the time, and we use it as a noun, and it is not. And I want us to stop thinking about it as a noun. I want to think of it as a process, because when we're talking about Scotland's rural communities, we're generalising about the experience of particular groups of people living together in particular places and facing challenges and impacts around energy and climate that are particular to them and their particular context. So when we talk about community, we need to be really clear about how we're defining that term. Who are we including? Who are we excluding? Community is not an all-inclusive, warm and fuzzy group hug. At best, it's a pragmatic ability to work together for a common goal across a diverse range of opinions and disagreement. So that's my first thing that I want us to think about, is who are we talking about when we're talking about community? And the other thing I want to think about is energy as power, both technical power and social power, because energy is at the heart of the multiple crises we are facing at the moment. Energy powers all of the infrastructure we need for daily survival. And Raffaella's talked about the link between with transport as well. So it's in everything that we do. We need it for everything that we do in our daily lives. But how we produce that energy, how we access it, is reflected in systems of power that control our lives on a large scale. And it's that entanglement of the relationship between people and the places where they live, and the systems of power, the cultural, economic, political, and technical, which bind these local experiences to the global crises. And I'm really glad that Raffaella has emphasised the importance of the regulatory and economic systems that we're working amongst, because those are the things that impact our experiences of energy. And it is complex when you're talking about energy, when you're trying to tackle subjects like fuel poverty. We are often looking at technical solutions for something which is actually a socio-economic problem. So I hope that we're going to get a chance to discuss that in more depth this morning. As somebody who grew up and lives in an island and has done research in the island, we can see that island communities are already facing and experiencing the effects of climate change and market failure. We're the location of significant renewable energy resource, and we are seeing large-scale developments, but we're often, the individual members of communities are not seeing the direct benefits. In fact, in Orkney, where we've been producing all our electricity from renewable sources since 2013, we've still got one of the highest rates of fuel poverty in Scotland. So we have to look at what What can we do to start to address that? In Orkney, a lot of the narrative around energy has been dominated by technological innovation and achievement, but there's been an enormous amount of invisible work that's gone on, which has been about the social technology of community and also the role of community-owned energy in these technological innovations. I work for Community Energy Scotland. We work for our members. Our members are all community organisations. Many of those own their own community energy generating assets, whether that's a wind turbine or a hydro scheme or solar installation. And revenue from communities that have 100% community-owned wind farms is 34 times higher than community benefit from private wind farms. Benefit from owning your own technology is significant, and it's not just economic, it's that empowerment and that ability to do things for yourselves. And that's something that I would like us to discuss this morning when we're talking about just transition, because it's about ownership, it's about power, and it's about the ability to have place-based solutions to the challenges that we face. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Becky. And I think we should applaud both of our speakers for sticking to time on very complex subjects. We have questions coming in, so I'm going to go straight to the questions. So firstly, from Jane, given the ongoing debate on the electricity market reform, should Scotland be pushing for locational brackets or zonal pricing, given its positive effects on customer pricing for rural communities? Who of you would like to begin with that one?
I can come in on that. I mean, I speak from the experience, and I have to say that my background is not technical, but having looked at the experience of communities in Orkney, it's very difficult for people here to hear the headlines of we're producing all this, we're producing more than we need from wind power, and yet we still are paying so much for our electricity. We have the highest rate of fuel poverty in Scotland. It's also about demand. We have grid capacity issues in Orkney, so the grid is getting, community-owned turbines are being shut down when the grid's at capacity. If we had zonal pricing, if we had an Orkney tariff, we could be using the electricity when it's being produced. We could be, charging our electric vehicles, charging our domestic batteries, using that electricity when there is high levels of supply, and then having that available to us when the wind isn't blowing, because we're hopefully storing it. And if we had pricing that matched that, the reason that doesn't work at the moment is because of the pricing.
Okay, thank you very much. There's a question here that I think will be for Raffaella, so if you want to unmute, that would be grand. This is from Vanessa Hallhead. I live on the Black Isle, and the Moray Firth Green Freeport are making a big play on developing green hydrogen here. Can the speakers please say where we stand with green hydrogen development now?
Yeah, thank you. That's a very interesting question. Green hydrogen can be produced, and it is produced. I think that one of the issues that is not very publicized, I think, from a technical point of view. At the moment, we do use fresh water, clear water, okay, mainly. And this is done, it's a technical problem. The electrolyzers that do split the water can do not work properly if you don't have the clean water there. Now, the first problem that I see is that in Scotland, we don't have, together with the green hydrogen production, a strategy for management of water. Water is on the west, wind is on the east. So this is the first thing that technically we need to consider. And I believe that we are missing a lot in Scotland if we do concentrate on green hydrogen only. And the reason why I'm saying that is if we define a community, and now depends how we want to define it, and Becky actually made this important point, because I said it's a system approach, but how do you define the system is extremely important. I think that locally I don't think that green hydrogen can be really produced and owned by the local community, because it's too complex as a system to be managed properly locally. So you can see green hydrogen like something which will come, but also to consider very strongly is the land use. And here it comes with the socioeconomical issue. The electrolyzers needs to be very large if you want to produce at scale. So we have to think about what the land use is there. So, but my quick answer is yes, green hydrogen can be produced. And it's a very good way, actually, to store energy. I don't think that we are going to see hydrogen in our boilers. I don't think so. However, to store energy is great. Hydrogen is a vector. It's an energy vector. So I think that we should support hydrogen, but we should be more flexible and probably don't concentrate on green hydrogen only.
Okay, thank you. Becky, are you content for me to move on, or would you like to comment on that question?
I mean, we have had experience of hydrogen developments in Orkney as part, and we've had communities have been involved in it, but it's been very much at the research and development. And I think it would echo what Raffaella's saying, is that the experience is that it is a useful storage vector. For us, it was a way of looking at how you could create demand within the system when you had high levels of wind generation and limited grid capacity, but at the moment there's not a demand in terms of a market, and then there's issues of how you store it and how you transport it, and then how you use it. So yes, it's at a community level, it's not an option.
Thank you. We have a couple of questions now around the theme of community capacity and expectations on communities. I'll read them both, but then I think we'll take them separately, but it's just so you get the gist of both. Julian Newman says, I find that the phrase just transition evokes skeptical responses from most people in the communities that I know. What definition of justice would the speakers embrace, and how implemented? The second question, but we'll come back to that, is from Laura Bird. Unreliable energy sources need a second backup system, brackets gas, to fill the many gaps. Why should any community, rural or urban, pay for a double system in pursuit of notional net zero targets? So let's go back to the justice. What definition of justice would the speakers embrace, and how would that be implemented? Who would like to begin? Raffaella, are you about to speak?
I'm happy to start. This is a very difficult territory, and it goes very much with my work on ethics in engineering, I suppose, and responsible technologies. Justice for me, in terms of transition, is not just make energy more accessible in terms of it costs less, so I can use more. It involves much more than that. It involves mainly to empower people, and each one to be empowered. Like it has been said previously, because energy is power, it's also social power. And it goes with empowering people. And that's why I think that some ownership is important. I don't know at which level, but ownership is important, because when we own production of energy, for instance, we feel more empowered. There is also a psychological perception. If you have a microgrid, for instance, you feel more responsible because you have a finite perception. If you think about the whole grid in the UK, you don't feel very responsible because you feel like, oh, that's an infinity perception that I have. But just transition, it means also to understand that there are areas in Scotland where we need to consider that we are moving from oil and gas, and some communities have developed on oil and gas. So it's also about skills, about reskilling people. That makes the transition just, to make sure that people can manage what they are being given, because you cannot create like a wind farm or have like something that produces energy in your backyard, and then you don't know how to manage it, and then if it stops, you are stuck. So I think that it's all this kind of social issues that make the transition just, so everybody equally feeling empowered and equally not equally, but at least at some extent participating into the energy provision that we all need. So making people responsible, I suppose, that will make also just and give them the opportunity to be responsible.
Thank you. Becky, I'm presuming you would very much like to come in on this.
Yes, please. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this relationship with energy is a very personal one. And if we have a relationship and ownership and agency over the production and the use of energy, and also the benefits from that, because I think one of the things that is really obvious about the system that we live in at the moment is that we have socialized the cost of energy production, but privatized the profits from it. And that is something that community ownership of assets can really change. Community Energy Scotland is part of the Scottish Community Coalition on Energy. We've published a paper calling on the governments to look for a fair energy deal for Scottish communities, where we're lobbying for increased community ownership and political support for that. Our aim is looking for 1 gigawatt of 100% owned community energy by 2030. And we have some very specific asks about how policy can help with that. But it's also about thinking about those communities who are not in a position to own assets, whether that's because they're in an urban setting or in a location that doesn't support having an asset. So looking at how we can increase community benefit from larger scale developments, looking at the options for community buy-in, the community to have ownership of part of a larger development, but also the setting up of a community wealth building fund, which would be on top of existing benefits going to local communities who are directly impacted, but would then be available for the whole of Scotland, all of the communities to benefit from this asset and this resource, and can help us to have a sense of ownership about that relationship with energy. And it isn't just about, as Raffaella said, it isn't just about finding ways to generate electricity so that we can use more energy. It's about how do we live, how do we have a good standard of life for everybody and have justice and have inclusion, but in a way that protects both people and planet, so that we have places that we want to live and a flourishing future for.
Thank you both. And Becky, this next question follows on from what you've just said, which I read out before. Laura Bird: unreliable energy sources may need a second backup system to fill the many gaps. Why should any community, rural or urban, pay for a double system in pursuit of notional net zero targets?
Well, I think there's several parts to that. Is that climate change is happening. We need to do something about this. It needs to be, everybody needs to be part of the solution and also have the benefit from moving to a cleaner energy system. It isn't about one particular technology, it's about finding the right mix. We do need to be looking more at storage, and Raffaella will be able to talk more about the technical side of that. Having community ownership over assets, having locally based solutions which are responsive, and having that, again, that relationship where we can adjust our use to generation. But there is an issue there, and it's back to that thing that we both spoke about at the start, that it's more than just a technical challenge, it is a socioeconomic challenge, and we need, as a society, to be asking the question of what do we value and how do we get the future we want with that, in a way that is fair, which is just.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Raffaella, do you want to add to that at all?
No, I think that Becky has made the point. I see that there are many questions. So
Yeah, that's good.
and
Yeah,
yeah, I see
good.
also that there is one about IKME that I suppose
Yeah.
is for me.
Well, do you want to take that, and then I'll come back
Yeah,
to the next one? Yeah.
I would like to take that one because I think that David Smart is saying that what is the IKME position on hydrogen as an indirect greenhouse gas? And I suppose that what David means here is that during the production of hydrogen, we do produce greenhouse gases. My answer to this is that I don't want to speak yet for the IKME. I think that the position precisely on this fact is part of all our strategy in terms of 2028 plus, in terms of making sure that the sustainable development goals are at the center of our strategy. But I can tell you that there is always, I mean, we don't speak in this context of production of hydrogen directly from oil and gas, so from fossil fuels, because we are not promoting in Scotland grey hydrogen. I was speaking before about green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, where there should be a capture of CO2. I personally believe that the only way we can really go to net zero is actually doing carbon capture. And this is something else that in Scotland we should consider. Carbon capture and storage is important if we really want to get to net zero. This is my opinion, and I think it's also IKME opinion in terms of this particular issue. I know that soon I will have the hat of president of IKME, so that's why I thought that's probably it's for me. Anyway,
That's very kind.
We'll speak more about that. I'm sure in the future.
Thank you so much. There's a question here, and you touched on that, Becky, already. Fiona Newton says, I think there should be much more emphasis on reducing energy use, especially electricity. I'm concerned about the loss of land to farming, and we need food security. I can see you nodding as well, Raffaella, so perhaps start with you, Becky, and then feel free to come in as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. So the work I'm doing with the Island Centre for Net Zero is working with communities as part of the Island Community Action Network. And these are all local communities who are looking at decarbonisation, but they're looking at it in terms of sustainability and resilience for their community. And energy is part of that mix, but it is also about things like food security. So a lot of them are looking at local growing and looking at how you can reduce your carbon footprint by thinking more circularly about the systems and the economies that we live in. So how is energy part of that mix with things like transport, with things like food growing, with stimulating opportunities for economic development in that place and keeping the benefits in that particular community?
Yeah, I think that Becky has absolutely pointed out two important points that I wanted to make. We have to be more responsible in using energy. It doesn't mean that we will be less rich if we use less energy. We have to be we have to use energy in an intelligent way. I think that unfortunately, and this is an ethical issue, I believe, we have developed our society with the fact that oil and gas is there, can be used, and is readily available, except in the 70s when we know what went on. But I think it's there, and we have reserves for that. So I think that, and also from an engineering point of view, I think that we have not been very good in having processes that are extremely efficient. We were happy when it was okay. I mean, if we were losing, it's not a big deal because we have infinite, well, not infinite, but a lot of feedstock, so we can afford that. But more importantly, I think And that's something which I believe that should come really at the core of the strategy in Scotland, is circularity. I mean, the circular economy is the most important thing that we should consider in this context. And that's why I was advocating that if you can do locally things like, I have a pyrolyzer in my backyard, I now pyrolyze my agriculture waste. It's a little thing. I can produce some bio oil, which can be used in the machinery that I use to produce in my land, to produce food, crops. So I think it's just a very stupid, a very simple example, but I believe that we have to be able to reuse, re-engineering, and make possible for everybody to consider the circularity of what we do. And this is not in the strategy, I'm afraid. And this is something which will make the strategy more towards a just transition, I think.
Thank you both very much. I'm going to change tack slightly now, and I'm going to bring two questions together, looking at that more of that ecosystem of energy production and alternatives and so on, and the challenges associated with them. So a question from Ian Halcrow and then a question from Daniel Lee. Firstly, Ian Halcrow, with the increasing opposition to pylons and new overhead power lines, has any serious consideration or investigation been done into using onshore HVDC as an alternative? The second question is Daniel Lee. Where do we go with community-owned marine renewables, given the eye-watering costs and big business model that is rolling out now at great speed? Is this possible? So let's go back to the first one around opposition and alternatives.
Okay, well, I don't. Well, sorry, I'm starting, but I mean, I will just start and then I will leave back if it's okay. Well, I don't really think that we have been considering seriously some of the alternative of what we have at the moment, to be honest. That's my personal opinion. And there are so many alternatives that we can consider, but some of them are not viable. Let me take just the example of marine renewables that has been mentioned there as well. I was speaking with a colleague of mine here at Herod just last week, and he said to me that they are not going anywhere because, unfortunately, the cost, as you said, it's prohibitive. So I think that there are technologies that we cannot employ because of the cost. There are technologies that are not employable because there is a bad perception about them. There are other technologies that definitely will not be scalable, will not go at scale. So we can't really probably employ them. Personally, I believe that we do have some alternative. We have good alternatives in Scotland, like wind power. And I would advocate even solar power. Now you don't need to have a sunshine to be sure that you can use some solar power. So we have other alternatives that we should really explore in Scotland, and they will be part of the mix. And I assume that photovoltaics will go down in price. They have already gone down. Batteries will go down in price, and we have to invest on technologies that can deliver. And we know that if employed at large scale, will be much more affordable. So I think my opinion is not to disperse ourselves in so many things that at the end are not going to contribute to a good outcome, I suppose, in terms of energy for everybody.
Thank you, Becky.
Again, I'm not coming from a technical position, but having looked at communities and looked at what's happened in Orkney, it's about a mixture of technologies. It's about technologies being appropriate for the particular situation. I think the marine sector is challenging for community ownership, but I do think, again, it's back to what do we as a society value, because it's again down to market forces and regulation as to how these emerging technologies are being supported or not supported. They certainly, tidal is proving itself to be capable of generating and has that reliability in terms of, we know the tides are coming. It's not like the wind that may or may not blow. So there are potential opportunities there, but whether we take them and how we take them, and whether we consider the social benefit as well as the economic benefit, that is a question for us as a society to be starting to make decisions around.
Oh, I want just to add one quick thing. The other quick thing that I would like also people to reflect on, it's transport. Anything we are doing, even, and in a way, HVDC is about transport. That works fine. That works well, but I think it's we have to look at the problem together, not only production but also transport and storage, which has been very much neglected, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you. So changing tack slightly again, a question here from FRSE. How would a values-driven business that works in the energy transition sector best support rural communities to get their community projects designed, financed, and operational? What challenges do these projects face?
Oh, good question. So I think the key is to work with communities, and again, it's back to the question about who are we including and excluding in communities. So in the work that we do as Community Energy Scotland, we're working with community organisations who have a mandate. They're constituted organisations. They're working within the community. They have a constitution. They have they're working on behalf of the community for the community's benefit. But if an organisation is coming in from outside, it's not always easy to see who you mean when you're talking about the community. So it's about being very clear about who you're working with, and being very clear about that relationship with the community, and working with them from the start to design something that is actually going to be useful and actually going to address the needs and the vision of that community. And it is about communication. Ultimately, these good collaborations come from good communication.
Thank you.
What I would like to add here is that, I think that in principle, design and finance the projects would not be a huge problem. Somebody can probably help in doing that. However, when it comes, the finance is not just the capex, it's not just the money that you need to build the project. You have to see how and when you are starting to make money out of the project. That is the most difficult thing. And as well as the management. And that's exactly what I advocated at the very beginning when I did the introduction. I think that, just a transition, ownership comes also with the opportunity to manage the power system. And if you don't have the skill, if you don't have the skill that are needed to operate and to make sure that is continuously operating, that is where the problem will come later on. So I think that it's not so easy like doing, starting something at home. That's why I was advocating that solar can be much easier to manage. I have friends in Italy that have completely gone solar. They have even bought their own battery where they save and they store themselves the energy, and they use, but they are very, I mean, it requires for them to use the dishwasher at some time, the washing machine at another time. So it's organizing a different kind of life. So this is why, again, decide how the community works is important, who you include into the system. So I think that you should go for something which is possible, not for something like hydrogen that the local community base is not possible, personally, I think.
Okay, thank you. In the last 5 minutes, I want to pick up the future focus questions, particularly phrased in that way. And if I could ask you to keep your answers a wee bit shorter so we'll get through 3 questions, that's my ambition. The first is around the cost for communities. Walter Douglas says that you say that community ownership is important, but this requires a huge financial commitment, £80 million to buy 10% of one of our local wind farms. What happens if there are technical breakthroughs in the next 20 years, such as nuclear fusion, and this community investment could be extremely risky?
I mean, what we would give for a crystal ball to see what's going to happen in the next 20 years, but we know that the technology works. Yes, it is a big commitment. What part of what we're asking for is, again, and this is where we need policy change, and we need to be looking at supporting communities to have ownership over assets, whether that's as much as those really large wind farms, or whether that's something at a smaller scale. It depends. Again, it's context specific. Everything we do is a risk, but doing nothing is also a risk. And I would say, from the experience of the communities that I know who have invested in energy generating assets, the benefits have been financial, significantly financial benefits, but it's also been, and it's picking up a little bit of what Raffaella was talking about, if you have technology that you have ownership over, it develops your skills, it develops your agency to do other things. So communities, like I'm thinking of the island of Shappensea, for example, in Orkney, who are running community transport. They've run an out and hours ferry service. They're doing housing projects. And this is because they have an asset. They have their wind turbine that's producing income for their community.
Thank you. Raffaella, quickly, any points?
I think that Becky has actually made the point. I don't think I will. I mean, yes, fortunately, technology advances and things change, so we cannot predict what is going to happen. But not doing anything is not an option. So I think something has to be done. Sorry.
And a really quick answer to this, because I want to bring in the final question. Where is the future of grid connected community owned energy, given the restrictions on new grid connections and the ending of current fit agreements? Any quick thoughts on that?
Well, I think that there should be I mean, I'm very much in favor of the grid connection, because otherwise you cannot do everything that we have been talked about. Yeah, I mean, this is something which is true in other countries. And wind, for instance, is connected, and you can sell the energy to the grid, and you are linked to the grid. So it's something that the grid in the UK is very old. I'm sorry. And it's something needs to actually, probably we can save a lot of energy if we just go for a better grid.
Becky, do you have a quick addition, or is that?
I think it depends on the context, but yeah, the grid is an asset. And if we had good grid connection, it's always better to be connected to something, because electricity is not like water. You can't put it in a bucket and save it for later. If you have places for it to go where it can do good things, then that's the ideal. And the challenge is storage, the challenge is having supply and demand balance against each other, and the grid is what helps with that.
Thank you. Before I hand over to Des with the unenviable task of pulling some threads together, I'm going to ask you this final question, but you literally have a few seconds each to answer it. Alex Turner says a future generations commission like the Wales model provides opportunity for aligning on long-term decision making. Do we need to go beyond our silos, such as energy, to better collaborate towards net zero?
Yes. Quicker.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to hand over to Des, and then we'll come back, obviously, to give our thanks.
Thanks very much. Gosh, that
Des,
was...
over to you for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. That was terrific. Thank you, Raffaella, Becky and Sarah, for covering so much ground. And listening to you and seeing the great range of questions, it's clear that there are as many really challenges as opportunities regarding the future of energy production in Scotland. And I took many points, but let me just very briefly share 5. And the first one is just regarding technological and scientific advances. These really are both rapid and exciting. And the challenge seems to be that we need to excite communities to embrace what should be an energy secure future. Climate change is real. Not least as we witness the mounting evidence on extreme events. So we need to do all we can to reduce the carbon emissions, but in environmentally and socially respectful ways. The second point is just to be mindful that we are at this important junction in terms of how communities may benefit locally from energy developments. And the UK government right now is in the midst of making important announcements regarding that, and we need to have an eye towards the parliamentary elections in Scotland next year regarding what sorts of promises and undertakings are being made. Third, Raffaella, you stressed the importance of taking a systems approach to devising our energy future. And this is incredibly important if we are to see a just transition, which was raised several times, as we shift towards renewable energy production, embracing social, economic and environmental needs. And Vanessa asked about green hydrogen, and that took us into a discussion on the future of water and land use, which is a recurring theme. And both Fiona and Alex touched on that as well in the chat. And clearly here we need a rounded government-led conversation on the future of land use, which embraces energy, nature and food security, and we need this soon. Fourth, Becky, you discussed our understanding of rural communities. What is a rural community and whose voice do we listen to as opposed to follow? Where does the power base lie in the debate over the future of energy production? It's incredibly important that we build on some of the successes we've had in local communities, thinking of communities like Golson and Lewis, which has benefited massively from the wise and fair use of renewable energy spin-offs. So we need to build on such success stories. And finally, just a reminder, listening to the two speakers, thinking about affordable energy. It should be the right for everyone, not just in rural Scotland. But in rural areas, energy needs are far greater. If you can afford it, you take heating and lighting for granted. But if you are poor and disadvantaged, having no heating or decent lighting can be the very worst of experiences. We should bear in mind that when looking to the future, everyone should have a right of accessing affordable energy. And with that, I'll hand back to you, Sarah, but thank you for such a rich conversation.
Thank you, Des, and keep your microphone on because I'm going to ask you the question that we asked our panelists about the future, because you've just mentioned that and the rights in the future. Alex Turner asked, a future generations commission like the Wales model provides opportunity for aligning on long-term decision making. Do we therefore need to go beyond our silos, such as energy, to get to better collaborate towards net zero? What's your thinking on that, having heard today's debate?
Yes, I agree. I suspect that's Alex, who lives on Skye at the moment and has worked in Wales. And it is so important that we get this joined up conversation going on the future of nature, food and energy security. And that's got to be embraced by a sort of robust discussion about land use, the future of land use, both nationally and regionally.
And how does that relate to your point about the addressing fuel poverty, having this future-focused, joined-up approach?
Well, because we have to think about the constraints of living in different parts of Scotland and the sort of pressures that are on us. You know, in Orkney and Shetland and Sutherland down to Galloway, Dumfries and Galloway, for instance, the pressures are very different in different areas. And these pressures need to be embraced by the conversations that are taking place regionally and locally.
Thank you very much. So thank you, Des, for bringing those threads together and highlighting key themes. I'm going to go back to Becky and Raffaella one by one to ask them for a single takeaway point that they would want to leave with us all today to keep considering. So I don't know who wants to go first.
I'll go.
Okay.
I would want to go back to the point that Des said about energy as a right and as a need for everybody, and the need for social justice around this. And I would argue that community energy is the cornerstone of that, and that we should be supporting the call for the Scottish Community Coalition on Energy for a fairer deal, meaningful community benefit, and as the gold standard, community ownership of energy.
Yeah,
thank you. Raffaella.
I would like to say that we do have challenges, but I like to see this also like opportunities. And the opportunity is the one that the community can really work together and have more social responsibility about an issue so relevant like energy. And my final point is that let's not work in our silos, but let's work in a much more orchestrated and also inclusive approach, considering what I said at the beginning, a system and circular approach.
Mm-hmm. Des, were you murmuring? Do you want to add?
Well, just in that last point, I mean, we've got to break down these silos. I mean, what this conversation has brought out, I think, very clearly, is to sort of move beyond just thinking about energy, but to think about food security, to think about nature security, to think about social inclusion, to think about just transition. That there are so many areas here that we clearly need to have a conversation with the right people and the right communities in the room. We can't have these sort of siloed considerations as we look ahead at our energy security. And the issue of the right to affordable energy, that is so important, especially in rural areas where the cost of energy is so great, and the misery that's inflicted through not being able to access decent heating and lighting. That's awful. So we need to put that right.
Mm-hmm. And I think that relates back to an earlier question as how would you all define just transition? It seems a core theme here seems to be about the right, energy as a right, which is a very powerful point to conclude our debate on. I'd like to thank on your behalf Raffaella Ocone, Becky Ford and Des Thompson for giving us their time and their insights and experience. It's just been brilliant to have this debate with you all online, and thank you very much. In concluding, I'd like to remind you that this session and all the other sessions up to the 3rd of April will be available on the RSE's YouTube channel. So please do continue to tune in on Thursday lunchtimes and to catch up and share these debates with others who you know will have an interest. So in the usual way, I'd like to thank our panelists and wish you all a brilliant rest of the day and week. Thank you very much from the RSE.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you to the audience. Excellent questions.